Leaves shredded overnight. Aphids spread across your plants like they own the place. Small damage turning into something bigger before you even have time to react. You walk out expecting progress. And instead, it feels like your garden is slowly losing control. Then, a few years ago, I spent time visiting farms in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where Amish families have been growing food for generations. These are people who feed entire households, sometimes 8, 10, even 12 people, almost entirely from their own land. They grow massive gardens, tomatoes, beans, squash, cabbage, potatoes, herbs, rows and rows of food meant to last an entire year. Naturally, I expected their gardens to have the same pest problems everyone else deals with. But when I walked through those fields, something caught my attention immediately. Yet the plants looked calm, healthy leaves, thick stems, deep green color, very little chewing damage anywhere. Not perfect, nature never is, but remarkably balanced. What surprised me even more was what I didn't see. There were no shelves of pesticide bottles, no sprayers sitting next to the beds, no weekly pest treatment routine, just gardens quietly growing. So I asked the obvious question. How do you keep pests under control? One of the farmers laughed and said something that stuck with me. He said, "Most gardeners try to fix pest problems after they appear. We build the garden so the problems don't appear in the first place." That one sentence flipped everything I thought I knew about pest control. But today I'll show you the Amish system that prevents pest outbreaks before they even appear, and why most modern gardeners are accidentally inviting pests into their gardens. Let me paint a picture that might sound familiar. It's midsummer. Your garden should be thriving. The tomatoes are finally setting fruit, your peppers are starting to fill out, and the squash plants are spreading across the bed like they own the place. But then something changes. You walk out one morning and notice tiny holes in the leaves. Nothing major yet. Just a few specks of damage. Easy to ignore. 2 days later, the holes are bigger. By the end of the week, entire leaves look like lace. Aphids have taken over the stems. Cabbage worms are chewing through your kale. And suddenly the garden that looked perfect just days ago feels like it's under attack. So what do most of us do? We grab a spray bottle. Maybe it's neem oil. Maybe it's an organic insecticide. Maybe it's something stronger from the garden center. Yet you spray everything down and hope for the best. Sometimes it works for a week, sometimes 2. But the pests almost always come back. And when they do, it feels like the same exhausting cycle every season. Plant, grow, fight pests, repeat. I know that cycle well because I lived it for decades. For years, I believed pest control meant reacting quickly when bugs showed up. I thought the goal of a gardener was to eliminate every insect that touched the plants. And no matter how many sprays I tried, no matter how careful I was, the same problems kept appearing every year. What most people don't realize is this: pests rarely appear by accident. In many cases, the way a garden is designed actually invites them in. Long rows of single crops, weak soil that produces stressed plants, gardens with no habitat for beneficial insects, a bare ground that removes natural predators. From a pest's perspective, many modern gardens look like an all-you-can-eat buffet with no security guards. The Amish approach is the opposite. Instead of fighting pests once they arrive, they quietly design the garden, so pests struggle to gain a foothold at all. They strengthen the soil so plants defend themselves. They mix crops so pests can't easily locate their targets. They invite beneficial insects that patrol the garden naturally. And they observe the garden every day before small problems become big ones. It's not a single trick, it's a system. And the reason it works is because it follows a simple idea that Amish farmers have practiced for generations. The garden is an ecosystem, not a battlefield. When the system is balanced, pests rarely explode into full infestations. But when the system is broken, no amount of spraying will permanently fix the problem. What most people don't know is that a healthy garden already has an entire army working inside it. Ladybugs hunting aphids, parasitic wasps controlling caterpillars, ground beetles patrolling the soil at night, microbes in the soil strengthening plant defenses. When those allies are present, they do most of the pest control work for free. The Amish simply design their gardens to support that natural balance. And once you understand how they do it, you start realizing something surprising. Many common gardening habits, things we've been taught for years, actually make pest problems worse. Neat monocrop rows, overclean gardens, ignoring soil health, waiting until damage appears before acting. All of these unintentionally tip the balance in favor of pests. The Amish system flips that balance back. And in the next section, I'm going to show you the core principle behind this entire approach, the mindset shift that makes the whole system work. Because once you understand this one idea, every other step suddenly makes sense. Before we get into specific techniques, there's one idea you need to understand first. Because without this principle, all the other steps will feel like random gardening tricks. The Amish approach to pest control starts with a very different way of thinking about the garden. Most modern gardeners treat pest control as a reaction. A bug appears, damage shows up, leaves get chewed. Then we respond. We spray something. We search the internet for a remedy. We try to eliminate the pest. But Amish gardeners approach the problem from the opposite direction. Instead of asking, how do we kill the pests? They ask, why did the pests appear here in the first place? That question leads to a completely different strategy. Because once you understand what attracts pest outbreaks, you realize something important. Pests usually target weak systems, not weak plants individually, but weak garden ecosystems. And that weakness often begins in the soil. Amish farmers have a simple belief that gets passed down through generations. Healthy soil grows strong plants. Strong plants resist pests. It sounds almost too simple. But modern plant science is actually confirming what traditional farmers have known for centuries. Plants grown in living soil, soil rich in organic matter, microbes, fungi, and nutrients, develop stronger cell structures and higher levels of natural defensive compounds. These compounds are part of the plant's immune system. They make leaves tougher. They make plant tissues less attractive to insects, and they allow plants to recover quickly from minor damage. Think of it this way. Yes, if two tomato plants are growing side by side, one in poor soil and one in rich soil, the insects will almost always attack the weaker plant first, because the weaker plant is easier to digest. It's the same principle predators use in nature. They target the easiest prey. This is why Amish gardeners spend far more time improving soil than fighting pests. To them, soil isn't just dirt. The soil is alive. Billions of microorganisms live inside it: bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and beneficial microbes, all interacting with plant roots in complex ways. These microbes help plants absorb nutrients. They stimulate root growth. They produce compounds that help plants defend themselves from disease and insect pressure. In other words, when the soil ecosystem is healthy, the plant becomes far more resilient. And Amish gardeners nurture that underground life every year. They add compost. They rotate crops. They avoid practices that destroy soil structure. Over time, the soil becomes richer and more biologically active, and something interesting begins to happen. Pest outbreaks become less frequent. Not because pests disappear entirely, nature doesn't work like that, but because the garden becomes balanced enough that small pest populations never explode into disasters. Another key part of this philosophy involves working with natural predators. In a typical modern garden, insects are seen as enemies. But in a balanced ecosystem, insects are actually part of the defense system. For example, a single ladybug can eat up to 50 aphids in a single day. A lacewing larva can devour hundreds of aphids during its short life. Parasitic wasps control tomato hornworms and cabbage worms. Ground beetles patrol the soil surface at night eating cutworms, grubs, and slugs. These beneficial insects are constantly hunting pests. The problem is that many gardening practices accidentally remove them from the system. When pesticides are sprayed, even organic ones, they often kill both pests and beneficial predators. When gardens are kept perfectly clean with bare soil everywhere, beneficial insects lose their habitat. When gardens are planted in long monocrop rows, pests can easily locate their host plants and reproduce rapidly. So while the intention is to control pests, the result is often the opposite. The natural pest control system gets disrupted. Amish gardeners avoid this trap by designing their gardens to support beneficial insects from the beginning. They plant flowers that attract predators. They mix crops together so pests struggle to locate them. They leave small wild spaces nearby where beneficial insects can live. Instead of trying to eliminate insects, they encourage the right insects. This turns the garden into a self-regulating ecosystem. Pests appear, predators follow, balance is restored. This philosophy is deeply connected to a traditional Amish concept called Gelassenheit. It's a German word that roughly translates to humility, surrender, or yielding to the natural order. In practical terms, it means trusting the systems that nature already provides. Instead of forcing control, you guide the system. In the garden, this translates to a very simple mindset. You don't fight nature. You design the garden so nature does the work for you. That mindset shift is the foundation of the entire Amish pest prevention system. Everything else builds on it. When your soil is healthy, when your plants are strong, when beneficial insects are present, and when crops are planted in ways that confuse pests, most pest problems stop before they ever become serious. That's why Amish gardeners rarely panic when they see a few insects in the garden. A small number of pests isn't a crisis. It's actually part of the natural cycle. Those pests are food for the predators. And once the predators arrive, the balance returns. This is the part that surprised me the most when I first learned it. The goal isn't to eliminate pests entirely. The goal is to prevent pest explosions. That's a much more achievable objective, and it requires far less work than constantly spraying and reacting. Once I understood this principle, I started looking at my garden differently. Instead of asking, what spray should I use? I started asking questions like, is my soil healthy enough? Are my plants strong? Do beneficial insects have a place to live here? Am I planting crops in ways that make it easy for pests to find them? When those questions are answered properly, pest problems drop dramatically. But understanding the philosophy is just the beginning, because the Amish don't stop with theory. They've developed a set of practical habits that turn this philosophy into a working system. Small daily practices, simple planting strategies, and a few clever techniques that make a huge difference over the course of a growing season. In the next section, I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step Amish pest prevention system, the exact actions that stop pest outbreaks before they ever begin. What surprised me when I first learned this is that none of the steps are complicated. There are no expensive tools, no specialized chemicals, and no complicated formulas, just a handful of habits repeated consistently. Let's walk through the system. Step 1. Build living soil first. The Amish believe pest control begins before a single seed goes into the ground. It starts in the soil. Every spring, before planting anything, they add 2 to 3 inches of compost across the garden beds and work it into the top 4 to 6 inches of soil. Most Amish farms use composted horse or cow manure mixed with plant scraps and bedding straw that has broken down over winter. This combination feeds soil microbes and builds organic matter, and that living soil produces plants that are naturally more resistant to pests. When plants grow in biologically active soil, their cell walls become stronger, and they produce natural defensive compounds that insects don't enjoy eating. Yet you'll still see the occasional bite mark. That's normal. but the plants recover quickly and pests struggle to multiply. The key here is consistency. Amish gardeners do this every single year, not just once. After 2 or 3 seasons, the soil becomes noticeably darker, looser, and more fertile. And stronger soil means stronger plants. Step 2. Never plant crops alone. One of the biggest differences you'll notice in an Amish garden is how mixed everything looks. Most modern gardens are planted in clean monocrop rows, tomatoes in one row, beans in another, cabbage somewhere else. It looks neat, but to a pest, it's basically a giant sign that says, "Food is over here." Many insects locate their host plants by smell. Cabbage moths follow the scent of brassicas. Aphids track chemical signals from tender leaves. Tomato hornworms locate tomatoes through scent compounds released by the plant. Amish gardeners disrupt that signal using companion planting. They mix aromatic herbs and flowers directly among their vegetables. Here are a few classic combinations. For every 3 to 4 tomato plants, they plant 1 basil plant nearby. Basil helps repel aphids, whiteflies, and tomato hornworms. Between rows of cabbage, kale, or broccoli, they plant dill or cilantro every 12 to 14 inches. These herbs repel cabbage moths and also attract beneficial insects when they flower. Around the edges of the garden, they plant French marigolds about 10 to 12 inches apart. Marigold roots release compounds into the soil that suppress root knot nematodes, and their scent helps deter certain flying pests. The result is something entomologists call olfactory confusion. The pest literally struggles to find its host plant because the garden smells like many different plants at once. Instead of an easy target, the garden becomes a confusing maze. Step 3. Invite the good bugs. This step is where the system really begins to work. Amish gardeners don't just repel pests, they recruit allies. Yet they deliberately plant flowers that attract beneficial insects, the predators that eat pests naturally. These flowers create what's called an insectary strip, a simple row of plants that produce nectar and pollen for beneficial insects. Common choices include sweet alyssum yarrow, dill fennel, Queen Anne's lace. These plants bloom for long periods, providing food for predators throughout the growing season. Within a few weeks, these flowers begin attracting ladybugs, hoverflies, lacewings, parasitic wasps. Each of these insects hunts common garden pests. A single lacewing larva can consume hundreds of aphids during its life. Hoverflies lay eggs near aphid colonies so their larvae can feed. Parasitic wasps lay eggs inside caterpillars, stopping infestations before they spread. Once these predators establish themselves, they patrol the entire garden. The pests never disappear completely, but they rarely explode into serious outbreaks. Step 4. The morning garden walk. This step sounds almost too simple to matter, but every Amish gardener I've spoken with swears by it. They take a short walk through the garden every morning, 10 to 15 minutes, coffee in hand, just observing. They look under leaves, check stems, scan the soil surface, and if they see a pest starting to appear, they remove it immediately. A tomato hornworm, a cluster of squash bug eggs, a handful of aphids. They simply remove them by hand and drop them into a small bucket of soapy water. This small daily habit prevents tiny pest populations from becoming major infestations. Because here's the truth most gardeners overlook. Serious pest problems almost always start small. One caterpillar becomes 10, 10 becomes 50. By the time visible damage appears across the plant, the infestation is already well underway, but when you catch the first 1 or 2 insects early, the problem disappears in seconds. The morning walk stops pest outbreaks before they ever begin. And over time, it trains your eye to notice subtle changes in the garden. You begin to understand what's normal and what isn't. That awareness becomes one of the most powerful pest control tools you can have. Step 5. Trap crops. The final step in the Amish system is surprisingly clever. Instead of trying to keep pests out of the garden completely, they sometimes redirect them. This technique is called trap cropping. You plant something pests love even more than your main crops. Then you plant it along the edges of the garden. For example, nasturtiums attract aphids more strongly than most vegetables. Plant them around the garden, and aphids often cluster there, instead of your beans or peppers. Radishes attract flea beetles. A small row planted near eggplants can pull beetles away from the crop you care about. And one of the oldest examples is blue Hubbard squash. Many gardeners plant 1 or 2 plants at the corners of their garden because squash vine borers and cucumber beetles prefer them. The pests move towards the trap crop instead of the main harvest. This strategy turns the pest's own instincts against it. Instead of fighting the insect directly, you simply guide it somewhere else. Those 5 steps form the backbone of the Amish pest prevention system. Build living soil. Mix crops to confuse pests. Attract beneficial insects. Walk the garden daily. Use trap crops individually. Each step helps. But when they work together, something remarkable happens. The garden becomes a balanced ecosystem where pests struggle to dominate. And once that balance is established, pest control becomes far easier and far less stressful. But if you're skeptical about whether this system really works, you're not alone. I felt the same way when I first started learning it. So in the next section, I want to show you the science behind why these methods actually work, and why researchers are starting to confirm what traditional gardeners have practiced for generations. Now, when I first heard all of this, I'll be honest with you, part of me was skeptical. It sounded almost too simple. Improve the soil, plant herbs and flowers, encourage beneficial insects. That doesn't sound like the kind of strategy that should stop serious pest outbreaks. But the interesting thing is that modern agricultural research is beginning to confirm many of these traditional practices. For example, soil scientists studying biologically active soils have found that plants grown in high organic matter soil develop stronger structural defenses. Research from universities such as Cornell and Penn State has shown that soils rich in compost and microbial life increase a plant's ability to produce secondary metabolites, natural chemical compounds that help plants resist insects and disease. In simple terms, plants grown in living soil are literally harder for pests to eat. The cells are tougher, the nutrient balance is better, and the plants recover faster when minor damage occurs. Entomology research has also confirmed what Amish gardeners observed long ago about plant diversity. When a garden contains many different species growing close together, pests struggle to locate their preferred host plants. Scientists refer to this as associational resistance. The scent signals from different plants overlap and confuse insect navigation systems. Instead of easily locating a long row of cabbage or tomatoes, the pest encounters a mix of smells and often moves on. Then there's the role of beneficial insects. Studies of agricultural ecosystems consistently show that predator insects can dramatically reduce pest populations when habitat is available. Lady beetles, lacewings, parasitic wasps, and hoverflies are among the most effective biological control agents in gardens and farms. A single lady beetle can consume up to 50 aphids per day, while lacewing larvae can eat hundreds of aphids during their development. Parasitic wasps lay eggs inside caterpillars such as tomato hornworms and cabbage worms, preventing those pests from reproducing. But here's the key point researchers emphasize. These predators only remain in an area if they have food and habitat. That means flowering plants for nectar, places to shelter, and a steady supply of small prey. When gardens include insectary plants like dill, alyssum, fennel, and yarrow, predator populations increase dramatically. Once established, those beneficial insects patrol the entire garden. Yet this is why Amish gardens often experience fewer pest outbreaks. They unintentionally, or perhaps intentionally, follow what ecologists call integrated pest management, or IPM. Instead of relying on chemicals, IPM focuses on prevention through ecosystem balance. Strong soil, crop diversity, natural predators, early observation. In fact, many modern sustainable farming programs now recommend exactly these same practices. So the methods that Amish gardeners have used for generations aren't just tradition. They're supported by ecology, soil biology, and entomology. Nature already provides a pest control system. The real secret is simply learning how to activate it. But understanding the science doesn't automatically make it easy. Because when I first tried applying these ideas in my own garden, I made a few mistakes. And that brings me to something I think is important to share: the learning curve that comes with switching to this approach. In the next section, I'll tell you what happened the first year I tried the Amish system, what I got wrong, and why it took about 3 growing seasons before the garden really started balancing itself. Now, I want to be honest about something. When I first learned this system, I didn't immediately believe it would work in my own garden. After all, I had been gardening for almost 20 years, and every method I knew revolved around reacting to pests, spray when aphids appear, treat cabbage worms when they show up, dust plants when beetles start chewing. So the idea of preventing pests by simply improving the system felt optimistic. Still, I decided to try it. The first year I started with the soil. I spread about 3 inches of compost across my garden beds and worked it into the top few inches of soil before planting. Then I tried companion planting. Instead of neat rows of vegetables, I tucked basil among tomatoes, planted dill between my kale, and added marigolds around the edges of the beds. And I also planted a small strip of sweet alyssum and yarrow to attract beneficial insects. And I started doing the morning walk. Every day, 10 or 15 minutes, just walking through the garden and looking carefully at the plants. Now here's the part that surprised me. The first year wasn't perfect. I still saw pests. Aphids appeared on the peppers in early summer. Cabbage worms showed up on the kale. A few hornworms found my tomatoes. At first, I thought the experiment had failed, but something interesting happened. The pests never exploded into large infestations. Instead of dozens of hornworms stripping branches overnight, I'd find 1 or 2 during the morning walk. Instead of entire plants covered in aphids, I'd see small clusters, and within a few weeks I started noticing something else. The garden was suddenly full of insects I had never paid attention to before. Ladybugs crawling along the stems, hoverflies hovering above the flowers, tiny parasitic wasps moving between the leaves, lacewing larvae hunting among the aphids. Once those beneficial insects appeared, the pest population started shrinking, not instantly, but steadily. The balance was beginning to shift. By the second year, the difference was much more obvious. The soil had improved after another round of compost. The companion plants were more established. And the beneficial insect populations returned even earlier in the season. That year, I noticed something remarkable. My tomatoes, peppers, and beans looked noticeably stronger. The stems were thicker. The leaves were darker green. And even when pests appeared, the plants seemed to shrug it off. While minor damage would appear for a few days and then disappear as predators moved in. By the third year, the garden felt completely different from the one I'd grown for decades. I still saw insects, plenty of them, but pest outbreaks were rare. Instead of fighting a constant battle, the garden mostly regulated itself, and the daily work was actually lighter. I wasn't spraying every week. I wasn't rushing to treat problems. Most mornings, the walk through the garden was just observation, checking leaves, watching pollinators move through the flowers, and occasionally removing a pest before it multiplied. That experience taught me something important. The Amish system doesn't create an instant pest-free garden. Nature doesn't work that way. What it does is gradually shift the balance. Each season, the soil improves. If beneficial insect populations increase, plants become stronger, and pest outbreaks become smaller and less frequent. It's a system that strengthens over time. And once that balance is established, the garden becomes far easier to manage. But here's the thing. As I started comparing my old gardening habits with what I was seeing in Amish gardens, I realized something else. Many of the things I had been doing for years, things I thought were helpful, were actually making pest problems worse. In the next section, I want to show you 3 common mistakes most modern gardeners make, mistakes I made myself for years, and how the Amish approach handles those problems differently. After switching to this system, I started looking back at how I used to garden, and honestly, I realized I had been unintentionally helping pests for years. Not on purpose, of course. I was just following common gardening advice that seemed logical at the time. But when you compare those habits with how Amish gardeners design their gardens, the differences become pretty clear. Here are 3 of the biggest mistakes most modern gardeners make. Mistake 1. Planting in long monocrop rows. Most gardens are organized into neat rows. Tomatoes in one row, beans in another, cabbage somewhere else. It looks tidy and organized, but to an insect, that layout is basically a giant buffet line. If a cabbage moth finds one cabbage plant in a long row, it doesn't have to search for the next one. Yet it simply flies a few feet and finds another identical plant. And another. And another. That allows pests to reproduce extremely quickly. Amish gardens rarely follow this pattern. Instead, crops are mixed together. Tomatoes grow near herbs. Flowers appear between vegetables. Different plant scents overlap throughout the garden. This creates confusion for pests. Instead of easily locating dozens of identical plants, insects have to navigate a patchwork of smells and plant types, and many simply move on. Mistake 2. Treating every insect as an enemy. For years, I assumed every bug in the garden was a problem. If I saw insects on my plants, I reached for a spray. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. Most insects in the garden are actually helpful. Ladybugs eat aphids. Lacewing larvae hunt soft-bodied pests. Parasitic wasps control caterpillars. Ground beetles hunt cutworms and then slugs. When pesticides are sprayed, when even organic ones, these beneficial insects often die alongside the pests, which removes the very predators that keep pest populations under control. Amish gardeners understand that a healthy garden needs insects. The goal isn't to eliminate bugs, it's to encourage the right balance of insects. Once predator populations establish themselves, they do most of the pest control work automatically. Mistake 3. Ignoring the soil. This might be the most common mistake of all. Many gardeners focus entirely on what's happening above ground. Leaves, flowers, fruits. But pests often attack plants that are already stressed or weak. And weak plants usually start with weak soil. Soil that lacks organic matter. With soil that has been compacted or depleted over time. Soil with very little biological activity. When the soil ecosystem is poor, plants struggle to absorb nutrients and develop strong defenses. That makes them far more attractive to insects. Amish gardeners focus heavily on soil health. They add compost every year. They rotate crops. They avoid practices that damage soil structure. Over time, the soil becomes rich, loose, and full of microbial life. And those conditions produce stronger plants that resist pests naturally. When you put these 3 ideas together, something becomes clear. Most pest problems aren't just about insects. They're symptoms of a system that's slightly out of balance. And once that balance improves, through soil health, plant diversity, and beneficial insects, pest outbreaks become far less common. Before we finish, I want to share one of the simplest techniques I've ever seen in an Amish garden. It takes almost no time. It costs almost nothing. And it protects young plants during the most vulnerable stage of their life. Because if you've gardened for any length of time, you've probably experienced this. You transplant a healthy seedling into the garden, maybe tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, or broccoli. The plant looks great when you go to bed. Then the next morning you walk outside, and the plant is lying on the ground. The stem has been chewed clean through at the soil line. That damage is almost always caused by cutworms. Cutworms are the larvae of night-flying moths. They hide in the soil during the day and crawl along the surface at night, chewing through the stems of young plants. And because seedlings have such soft stems, it only takes one bite to kill the plant. One night, one insect, one dead transplant. Amish gardeners solved this problem decades ago with a trick so simple, it almost feels too obvious. They place a small cardboard collar around each seedling when they transplant it. That's it. Just a ring of cardboard pushed into the soil around the stem. When planting a seedling, they slide the cardboard ring around the stem and push it about 1 inch into the soil, leaving 2 inches above the surface. This creates a physical barrier that cutworms cannot crawl over or chew through. The insect reaches the plant, but it can't access the stem. The seedling survives the night. Here's why this works so well. Cutworms attack right at the soil surface. They wrap their bodies around the stem and chew through it. But when the stem is protected by a cardboard barrier, they simply can't reach it. And the beauty of this method is that cardboard naturally breaks down in about 4 to 6 weeks. By that time, the plant stem has already thickened and hardened enough that cutworms can't damage it anymore. So the protection disappears naturally once it's no longer needed. No plastic, no chemicals, no waste. Just a small piece of cardboard that would otherwise be thrown away. The first season I tried this, I went from losing 5 or 6 seedlings every spring to losing almost none. And once you get used to it, the process takes only seconds while transplanting. Drop the plant in the hole. Slide the collar around the stem. Press it into the soil. Move on to the next plant. It's one of those quiet little tricks that doesn't seem dramatic, but it prevents a surprising amount of frustration. And that's something you'll notice again and again with Amish gardening techniques. They're not flashy, they're not complicated, but they solve real problems using simple materials and practical observation. And when enough of those small solutions come together, they create a garden that works with nature instead of constantly fighting it. What we covered today is a real piece of the Amish pest prevention system, but it's still just one part of a much bigger picture. Because Amish gardeners don't rely on a single trick to protect their crops. Everything works together as a system. The soil is strengthened every year with compost. Crops are rotated so pests and diseases can't build up in one place. Companion plants confuse insects and attract predators. Trap crops pull pests away from the main harvest. And small daily habits, like the morning walk, catch problems before they grow. When all of those layers work together, the garden starts doing something remarkable. It begins to defend itself. That's the difference between constantly fighting pest problems and building a garden where pest outbreaks rarely get out of control. Yes, if there's one lesson Amish gardeners understand better than most, it's this. A healthy garden is not a garden without insects. It's a garden where the right insects are in charge. For years, I believed success in gardening meant eliminating every pest that appeared. But nature doesn't work that way. A garden is a living system. There are always insects moving through it. Pollinators, predators, decomposers, and yes, a few pests as well. The goal isn't to remove that life. The goal is to guide it. When your soil is healthy, when your plants are strong, when beneficial insects have food and shelter, the balance begins to shift. Instead of constant outbreaks, you see small, manageable pest populations that rarely spiral out of control. The predators keep watch, the plants recover quickly, and the garden becomes far more stable. That's the quiet secret behind Amish pest management. They're not constantly fighting nature. They're designing their gardens so nature does most of the work. And once that system is in place, gardening actually becomes more enjoyable. Instead of reacting to problems all the time, you spend more of your time observing the garden. Watching pollinators move through the flowers, seeing ladybugs patrol the leaves, noticing how different plants support each other. It becomes less of a battle and more of a partnership. Now I'm curious about something. Which of these ideas surprised you the most? Was it the importance of building soil first? The idea of confusing pests with companion planting? The insectary flowers that recruit beneficial predators? Or the simple cardboard collar trick that stops cutworms overnight? Let me know in the comments. And if you've already tried any of these techniques in your own garden, share your experience. Gardening wisdom grows best when people pass it along. Also, if you enjoy learning about traditional gardening knowledge like this, methods that cultures have been refining for generations, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for spending some time with me today. And the next time you walk out to your garden in the morning, take a moment to look closely. You might start noticing that your garden already has an entire army working for you. Ladybugs hunting aphids, hoverflies patrolling the air, ground beetles guarding the soil. Once that system wakes up, pest control becomes a lot less complicated. I'll see you in the next video.